Welcome back. Now he is as much a victim as he is a perpetrator. He will be charged for crimes he committed as an adult. Dominic Ongwen, a former child soldier who rose to ranks in the LRA, his trial at the ICC in The Hague started today. We discuss what it means for him, the victims, and Uganda. This is Newsnight.
Newsnight is brought to you by Bank of Africa Mobile Wallet.
Joining me on Newsnight is Sarah Kihika, who is the head of office at the International Center for Transitional Justice. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Flavia.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Today is a start of what many would call a start of a long journey, because the trial is going to take some time. They've said even several years. Is this, a platform where people feel they'll heal with time, or is it a start of something they might not see truth to at the end?
Well, as you've noted, Flavia, this is a start of a long process. With regard to whether it's a process that will lead to healing, it is one of many processes that can contribute to that. Importantly, it is a process that starts to unravel, really, the nature of atrocities and crimes that were allegedly committed by Dominic Ongwen, and not really just Ongwen, but by the LRA as well. So as you're aware, they committed heinous crimes over the 20-year armed conflict in northern Uganda. And for the last few years, we've never had any accountability process that really delves into the nature of violations that were committed. So this is really the first step towards justice for victims.
Speaking of victims, I mean, we have this unique feature, that victim participation,
yes,
where we have about 4,000 victims who will be participating. We're curious to know, is it just as witnesses? Is there any other way or role they will play?
Well, this is one of the novel aspects that the International Criminal Court introduced in recognition of the important role of victims in trial proceedings. So in this case, victims will be represented by common legal representatives. We are very fortunate. One of our own, Joseph Manoba, will be representing over 2,400 victims. In total, there are 4,000 victims. So victims will be in a position to make statements at the different stages of the proceedings in relation to how the matters before court affect their personal interest. So it is one of the ways of demonstrating acknowledgement of the value of victims in trial proceedings.
Yeah, and I think transparency as well.
Absolutely.
It was noted that the risks and costs outweighed the concern of, where Ugandans wanted the trial in Uganda. And many all over the country are obviously tuned in and watching, and they're going to be very curious of each and every step. But this comes at a time when most African countries are casting doubt on the relevance of the ICC. Is this something to be concerned about?
Well, yes, indeed, over the last few years, we've seen a lot of criticism levied against the ICC, perceptions of bias and selectivity. But Flavia, I'd like us to step back for a minute and consider what is really being done here, in whose interest is justice being administered. And in this case, it's for victims. I think the central aspect that we should be asking ourselves is, to what extent does the ICC, in whatever small measure, contribute to justice for victims? As we've seen in our continent, we've had mass crimes committed. This is a continent ravaged by conflicts. This is a continent that has thousands of victims. And yet, this is a continent that does not have any particular mechanism for providing redress to these victims. And that's why the ICC is the only available option at the moment. Ideally, the ICC is a court of last resort.
Yeah.
It comes in when states are unable or unwilling. In this case, a number of these states, including Uganda, referred the situations to the ICC because they were unable. So really, unless we have mechanisms in our countries on the continent that provide redress to victims, I'm sorry, but I think the ICC is the only visible option. Yes.
Yeah. Yesterday, when we asked, thoughts on, before the trial starts, a lot of people were seeming to say, you know what, it should be taken, in accountability, the fact that he had a harrowing childhood, that he too was actually, in many ways, a victim. Do you think this, and I know they've been a bit distant to comment on how it will affect proceedings, as it should be in law. They should be very open on how that will be. But how do you feel this will actually affect the trial in the course to come?
Well, of course, this is something that has been debated over time. I mean, he is the first person being prosecuted for crimes which he also endured.
Was a victim
yes,
to, yeah.
Namely being forcibly conscripted as a child soldier. But one thing we need to understand is that he's being tried for atrocities which he allegedly committed after he attained the age of 18, in other words, as an adult. Well, of course, his trial evokes sympathy, but let us again not lose sight of the alleged atrocities which were read out at length. There are 70 counts which he allegedly committed against civilian populations in different internally displaced camps. Of course, the court will consider his victimization as a mitigating factor.
Right.
And as the trial proceeds, we will get to learn how that will determine the nature of his criminal responsibility.
Fantastic. As we wind up, Sarah, you're from the International Center for Transitional Justice.
Yes.
Let's talk about transition just in a few words as we wrap up.
Yes.
How the transition will be for many of the victims.
Well, the
still is, maybe. It's still ongoing anyway.
Of course, and there's still more that needs to be done for them to transition from victim to survivor and from victim and start thriving. This trial will not do that exhaustively. We need more processes. We need reparations process. We need a truth-seeking process. Government has been developing a national transitional justice process which has been in abeyance for a number of years. That is one of the mechanisms that will really provide a holistic measure for healing, for reconciliation, and importantly for acknowledgement for victims.
Thank you so much, Sarah Kihika from the International Center for Transitional Justice.